Hello, everybody, and welcome to this industry talk by Dr. Gayatri Vaidya. Uh, Let me start by giving a brief discussion about this talk. The talk series is to invite EdTech industry experts and kind of demonstrate their product as well as talk about the features of the product. So this particular specific talk that I'm very happy to host will focus on educational initiatives Mindspark as a learning program, why it is needed, what are its pedagogical principles that drive learning. Educational Initiatives has been an EdTech veteran, starting with strong fundamentals, doing a lot of randomized control trials, demonstrating the efficacy, and they're also now working with governments, state governments at large for scale. We have with us Dr. Gayatri Vaidya, who is the Associate Vice President at Education Initiatives Shiksha Vertical. It's called EI Shiksha. Dr. Gayatri has had 2 decades of experience in the fields of academics and education. She works on large scale assessment programs and assessment reforms in states. Gayatri continues to find interest in language and literacy pedagogy. Along with her team, they have created learning content in 10 Indian languages for Mindspark, through which children are learning via self-paced mode and they are getting rewarded and enriched. So without further ado, I invite Gayatri, Dr. Gayatri for this talk. Please join me in welcoming, and Dr. Gayatri, the stage is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Lakshmi, for this. I'm super happy and excited to share some of the things that in the space of EdTech we've been doing. I think Mindspark, of course, is one of the pioneering EdTech programs that we talked about. I also want to bring a lot of focus during my talk today on the aspects of pedagogy that in fact strengthens any EdTech product. And I think post-COVID, EdTech has become something which is very relevant now to many of us. There is a lot of openness towards this whole EdTech space, and the ecosystem is really growing very fast. And I thought it's a good time to also talk about how tech, when we use in the classroom spaces, it really has to be enhanced using pedagogical principles, and how the Mindspark program that educational initiatives have does its own research and brings it out. So my talk will be more of balance of both content and parts of tech. Wish to highlight certain aspects on how vernacular space, which is the regional space of education, is still devoid of edtech in many ways, and how through Mindspark, like you also mentioned in the introduction, we are trying to really reach out to those remote regions where children really have minimal support because of them being first generation learners, or because the schools having multiple other challenges that we generally have in remote areas. So that's the purpose of the talk. I will start sharing the screen and would love to have a lot of questions and interactions. I believe the slides that I have created are more to keep the discussion and dialogue flowing, but the more we interact through maybe comments, chat, and questions, I'll be able to bring more value to this discussion. So once again, thank you for having me. I'm going to talk about the tech space, but more of pedagogy-driven approach in the learning program that we have called Mindspark. And this has been in use in multiple private and public school spaces now for roughly around 15 plus years. Of course, post-COVID, the acceptance and penetration has been very high, and we'll talk about all those factors. Yeah, I think just to build the background, and most of us are already aware of the learning crisis India or any such nation with diverse background faces. I think this stands true for a lot of other places too, but from India's perspective, if we go back to studies like TIMSS and PISA, where we have definite evidence of us really lagging behind on the learning indicators. There are certain studies, one of them we have quoted here, which was EI Google study done long back in 2009, that also in a way indicated a situation of learning crisis. And when we say learning crisis, we need to understand what learning means here, right? So I think when we look at the education system, when we are in the classrooms or the schools, a lot of advancement has happened in terms of infrastructure, school setups, textbooks, and other necessary aspects of education. But the learning still happens very peripherally. So because of this, the existing rote practices, because of the way our assessments are also designed, somehow the classroom practices have been more loyal to the assessments, and our assessments have not really reformed much. So what happens is we keep on testing things which are more rote in nature or peripheral, or not really something that can help us understand the depth of the concept. And when we say learning crisis, the idea, overcoming learning crisis, the idea is to have these children, these students learn things very deeply conceptually, and as they grow in their learning standards, their ability to integrate one concept with the other and have that interconnected understanding, which almost translates into wisdom of education, getting developed, which is where all the 21st century skills that we talk about, critical thinking, problem solving, all these will happen when they start integrating multiple concepts and think of a complex problem. And typically, if we look at PISA and TIMSS assessment papers, also the questions are really like that. They are not questions that would ask you to, what is 2 plus 5, or it won't ask you a simple photosynthesis process. But they generally use a lot of real life context, and the set of questions that you have are all integrated, interrelated, often across subjects. So the idea of looking at education and the learning space more from the conceptual ground, where children are not really taught to pass exams and go to the next grade, but children are made into creative thinkers who can problem solve in the life, is something which we are really, really challenged with. Many of these studies, as you see, are 2008-9. We are continuously working with states, and we have newer data also. We also have Pratham Asar coming in every year. But we know that situation hasn't really changed. In fact, with I'll go to that slide later. In fact, with COVID coming in, situation has probably worsened for some very specific areas. So post COVID, there have been trends where we've observed the gender related enrollment has gone down. There were girl students who were at least in the school before 2020, but now after COVID, I think there is again this that regressive shift where girl students are really prefer to be more of household support and are not going to schools. Of course, teacher availability and overall ability of teachers to teach. Since we work in the foundational literacy and numeracy capacity, from our assessments and research in that space, we know that typically in 2020, 21, and almost parts of 22, bare minimum learning has happened, especially for those children who are the first generation learners, right? So typically more urban or children who have educated parents had access to multiple other ways to learn, but children who were purely dependent on a school or a school teacher or a textbook have really like gone way behind in their learning journey. And currently when we go to school and meet grade 4 children, we realize that they have really this whole lag that we need to overcome. Now, overcoming that lag can be a challenge, and which is where I'm going to bring this graph for all of us before we jump into Mindspark understanding. So, if you look at the graph carefully, the x-axis talks about the actual grade level where these students are enrolled, and the y-axis talks of their actual learning level. We all know that. Our classrooms currently are pretty heterogeneous in terms of children students learning level, but when you actually try and break it down, the pattern that comes out is slightly concerning, because then we have the same class, we just have one teacher, and the teacher has limited number of sessions or periods with multiple other things to close. So I'll take the example of grade 7 and 8 here. Each circle that you see indicates 10 students, right? So typically, if I look at the blue line, which is my ideal case scenario, where most of my children at grade 8 should be at grade 8 learning level. But in reality, what you see is the actual distribution that you see on the x-axis grade 8 pole, where you see there are hardly 10 or 20 students who are at their actual learning level, grade specific learning level, and a lot of other children are distributed across the spectrum, going as low as to grade 2, where you roughly have around 70 to 80 students out of the total students that we had sort of seen. So if you see the actual average learning level, which is indicated through red line, broadly you have, on an average, your grade 8 child is on an average at grade 4 level. And now if we think of a classroom setup, we are talking of one teacher who, of course, has to also deliver on the curriculum. So the grade 8 teacher is delivering on grade 8 content, um, maybe with the realization, but due to limitations, knowing that the children of that grade are not really equipped to receive grade 8 education. They are probably at their grade 3, 4, 5 level, and the gap of concepts that they already have makes it almost impossible for them to then sort of internalize grade 8 concepts. I'm not even talking about integrating and problem solving. I'm just talking about internalizing those concepts. And this sort of widens the gap all the more. So this is the challenge, and this challenge has been there for a while. Probably this has got slightly more accentuated after COVID, and which is where I think thinking of a solution where teacher is aided with some support is important. Now, how can teacher be aided with a support? So one idea that we've generally seen in a non-tech space is making groups of students who are at that particular grade level and promoting peer learning and other stuff. Again, there you need someone to guide these children, and one teacher can become slightly limited in her capacity to reach out to all these different groups. Within that groups also, if I take, in this case, if I take group grade 4 group, within that group also, I will have students at a certain level of understanding in terms of their own annual curriculum. So we need something which caters to each child in terms of their learning journey, rather than giving them at the grade level specific stuff. Of course, that can go on, but for certain concepts, and we know both in maths and language is all about first knowing, starting from basic sounds to words, to actually being able to interpret text that has more inferential context. And once I know or master language, my ability to actually learn subjects like sciences and sciences and even maths go higher. So can is my set of students really equipped to do the basic inferential thinking using languages, if I think of grade 8 level? Similarly, if I go to math, there are concepts that run across multiple grades. Let's take an example of fraction. So if we take fraction as a topic, it is in a way connected with starting way back when the children learn basic operations, and division is one of the operations. The understanding of fraction starts developing from division, and it goes on until they also master ratio and proportion and percentages. So all these concepts are interlinked, and if the preliminary or the pre-concepts of fractions are not really understood well, fractions one itself takes a back seat, and the development of post fractions concepts is going to be difficult. So that's where the whole idea of Mindspark came in, where the idea was to not just provide content on a tech platform, but to provide content which is catering to that child's learning level. That means, one, doing a thorough pedagogical analysis of how the content should be delivered. I will come to the other aspects of pedagogy. But then also making sure that the child gets very specific content that is required for their um, thing. Before we get into how Mindspark content is developed and how it is slightly different from many other EdTech programs, this is one of our favorite questions that we discuss, and I've continued to keep this. And by the way, the results haven't changed over the years. So while some of you might have seen this question from our other slides or presentations, even if we go today and test this question out in schools, including some of the good private schools, the distribution of answers remain pretty much the same until the misconception happens. So one idea, and I'm not going to discuss a lot about this question, but generally when we ask questions, we always, for checking understanding of measurement, we always put our objects at point zero. That's how I also learned in my school, that wherever it ends is the end point, and that's the number. Now, when you shift this pencil the way it is in this question, what we are actually trying to do here is differentiate whether the child is picking out their answer out of a rote practice of matching the object to the end, or they're actually measuring. And when you do that discussion, I think we have videos also available on YouTube, I can share later. When we interacted the children, we realized that when they picked 6 as the answer, if you see on the right side of the screen, you have option wise distribution. Most of the children, around 77% children, picked 6 as the answer, while the correct answer is 5, right? So typically we understand that there is a rote practice of looking at the endpoint, matching it with the number and presenting it. But when we actually went and discussed the answers with children, we realized that the measurement as a concept of distance between 2 points was not understood. So children were, even when we made them count, even when we shifted it from 2 to 3, they still chose 6. And the reason was because they were counting the lines and not really measuring the distance. So one of the misconceptions that came out, one was when children do not understand the difference between counting and measurement, their ability to actually come up with the right answer is limited. And then if I go back and design questions that can really put child in a situation like this, where first the same object is positioned starting from 0, move to 1, move to 3, and the child is then made to answer some of those questions. I can I'm going to use some of the medical terms though. I can help the child curate the misconception, overcome the misconception, and the child can also internalize the concept in a more concrete and real way. So Mindspark basically is driven fully through questions. Again, the reason being, there are multiple theories, but we believe that the child, if the child is an active learner, the child's ability to sort of stay involved in active learning and internalizing concepts is higher, and questions by and large keeps you more actively engaged in the way. Also it depends on how they are designed, but rather than having a video which I watch and then maybe answer questions, this is a more active way of working. So Mindspark, unlike many other edtech products, is the only product that, like, whenever we started actually working with states, we had to introduce it to the states, where we had to tell them it's not an assessment program, it's a learning program. Because the moment you look at the questions, the mind starts processing it as an assessment. But the nature of questions, the way questions progress from one subtopic to the other, are designed in such a gradual manner that they actually help you understand and learn the concept. It starts from the very basic and takes you to the most advanced of the aspects of that concept. So the whole idea of Mindspark actually came from all the assessment work that we were doing, starting from private school space and then going in the large scale space, where we have over the years probably a catalog of misconceptions across subjects, concepts, and grades, where we know that irrespective of a child being in a high fee elite private school versus a child in some remote village in Rajasthan or HP, there are certain misconceptions that are uniform. Maybe the distribution can be here and there a bit in terms of extent of that misconception, but those misconceptions sort of exist. And they are prevalent not because teachers don't know the topic, they are prevalent not because children can't understand, they are prevalent because the way some of the things are processed by the child, because child does not learn only inside the classroom, they also learn from their surroundings. And that sort of, if those misconceptions are not clarified at that grade level, then they may interfere in their higher grade learning. So a lot of our assessments data gave us an understanding of where children struggle the most, and using that data through some research we have come up with this program Mindspark, which is now all in all 15 plus years old. In the public school or government school space, it is roughly around 13 or 12, 13 years old now. And through that, I think the idea is also generating more research, getting into more of learning analytics, and trying and identifying how these learning trajectory works. Very far fetched, but of course, a wishful thinking that we've started working on is to actually come up with a plan where we know and we can predict certain concepts being the pivotal concepts in learning the and in predicting the learning journey of the child, and then customizing the content through that. I'll just take a moment and see if there are any questions, because right now I can't see them on the screen. Uh, so if there are questions, I can answer. I guess no. Okay. Um, yeah. So I've broadly spoken about the program. So Mindspark is available on laptop as an app. So laptop based, web browser based learning program, which is generally preferred in the government schools because the schools have certain ICT infrastructure, and there they generally have laptops or Chromebooks, which is where browser-based system works. During COVID, when we started working a lot actively with multiple partners, we also have it now on a tab. It is both available in offline and offline online fashion, so that in the remotest of the area where internet can be a challenge, the session can still happen, and then the teacher or the coordinator, it's there is a very different implementing structure. We can talk about it some other day, but that person can then come once in a week to a more internet accessible region and sync the content. So that has really made the reach very wide. Over the years, like Lakshmi also mentioned, we have Mindspark now in 10 different Indian languages, and the reason is to basically actually also make it accessible to children who have literally no support beyond their school systems, to ensure that they continue to learn. We in the government school spaces, we have had three different third party evaluations done on Mindspark, where Mindspark was a program provided to the school, and we were assessed by different agencies like JPAL, QEI, and ID Insight. And in all three different studies, Mindspark was found to be making significant learning gains, both in language and maths in children. And the purpose of doing this study was also because when we create our programs, we work with certain beliefs. And while the belief is also founded in very sharp research outcomes, it is also important to see whether when we actually think of it at scale, right? One is working with schools, a second is working with systems. So when you start working with systems at scale, the challenges are different. The teachers may have motivation to take those sessions, not have those sessions. There can be schools where electricity or power can be problem. There can be schools where student absenteeism can be a problem. Multiple different things play out, especially when you think of say a state like UP, which is huge and with a very diverse demographics, right? And the idea of doing this independent studies was also to, in a way, understand where at scale whether Mindspark can really help in learning or not. We're happy, very happy that it has shown some promising results. As part of then, because of the momentum that it got through these studies, it has been part of multiple discussions and documents that have been published. There has been a case study written on Mindspark. when we also encountered certain, of course, learning gains, but there are aspects of implementation and other things. So the case study was picked up by Harvard on understanding how making things at scale is possible and has its own challenges and how to take it forward. So while we have spoken about it, I think quickly if we can spend some time on the theory of change on of Mindspark. So the idea here is at the student level, the student remains to be an active learner, and I'm really, you can synthesize it. I'm going to give you main points of this. So basically, theory of change is where you have certain inputs going to the system and you try and measure for long-term outcomes and impacts. And there are different roles that each of these stakeholders that we have on the left side play. So for students, it's more about active participation, presence in school, and making sure that they do it. Also, they do it mindfully, and then you have enough usage to see whether learning happens or not. The teacher's role, and Mindspark very strongly believes that while it can function without teacher, we for us it is a teacher aided program, because a lot of nuances that a teacher can bring, both in terms of socio emotional interaction with the child while the child is learning, and also in terms of navigating and troubleshooting with the child while the concept is being learned. We do believe that a teacher aided approach to Mindspark can be beneficial. However, during COVID, as we also tried out in many at home model spaces, Mindspark is also a good standalone working program. So for teachers, I think it's more about ensuring infrastructure, managing it, supporting if there is a program which has additional field staff or lab in charges, supporting them, or being that person who's present in the Mindspark lab, and also be comfortable with sharing one of the sessions, because teachers as such have very limited sessions to do. But the idea is that also for teachers, it's a slight mindset shift, right? Because if I'm a grade 8 teacher and I have say 5 sessions for 5 periods for maths, and if I, as the part of the program, I choose 1 or 2 sessions per week going for Mindspark math, it may or may not help me in my grade 8 learning, because my class is going to be very diverse. My children are going to be present at different learning levels. So while it strengthens the learning level of children, and that should contribute towards them coming closer to grade 8, practically it may take some time off my regular teaching. So just balancing that and bringing some alignment there is important. And there are multiple other stakeholders that play very important role, starting from the foundations that we work with or the government officials that we work with. And I think their role becomes more of support, collaboration, and monitoring, because with those three aspects, a whole system can be sort of ensured towards higher usage, contributing towards higher learning. The idea is that the learning that happens through Mindspark is one conceptual. It is it is founded in fundamental concepts that are essential for learning. It does not skip any grade specific learning, and that means that when the child is at a certain learning level, they definitely have conceptual clarity of the necessary concepts, and that in a way brings them to higher order thinking skills, plus what we call as 21st century learning skills, like critical thinking, problem solving, creative thinking, and other things. And maybe in we have a couple of case studies, but we also see that children who have, so from our Delhi slum center, there was a kid who was with us for grade, I think, 3 to 8, coming from slums, having uneducated parents, ended up being in a university in Hyderabad, and he's a coder now. And actually he reached us through LinkedIn to share how he actually benefited from Mindspark. So I think the idea is that it is not just learning, but it is also an opportunity to really change the way they could have lived their life, both financially and generally socially. So socio-economical benefits are many at one point. Yeah, I want to now focus. Any thoughts or questions until now? Am I? I'll just take up pause again and I'll focus on questions if there are any. There are no questions as such as of now. Sure. Um, I want to now focus on something called PAL, right? Maybe this term is new, maybe you're familiar. I'll just expand it. So, Mindspark is a PAL program, which is personalized adaptive learning. It's personalized for that child. It's adaptive because the child, depending on how the child or student responds, gets the next question. So, it's very algorithmic based, designed in a way where it is continuously either challenging the child to do tougher questions to make them get exposed to higher levels of the same concept or take them to the next higher concept, or when the child continuously struggles on a certain types of questions on the basis of pedagogical relation, they are brought to a lower level or slightly less complex concept from where the child restarts. So we were talking about the whole fraction scenario, and if we say that within that particular section the child is struggling with a set of questions, they will be brought back to across levels to go to a level where they actually then start answering those questions, understand the prerequisites of the higher order question, and then come back through question answers to the original question. So it's highly adaptive and it's completely based on child's responses. So if you are in a classroom and if you have 30 students working on systems, none of the two children will have the same question, even if they are on the same topic, because again, maybe there are some errors or misses in responses, maybe their understanding or their approach is better. So if consistently the answers are correct, they jump levels. I'll show you the structure. They jump levels quicker. If they are consistently struggling with a certain questions, then they come down to a simpler concept and then again are taken forward. So personalized adaptive learning program, and how is it adaptive is what something I wanted to spend some time on. Sure. So because we have all the children at a certain grade level, the first thing that we do, and this is more relevant from government school spaces where the classes are highly heterogeneous, there is a screening test that takes place. Now, the screening test is a scientifically designed test that has questions starting from grade 1 to grade 9, and on the basis of students' responses to these questions, we sort of determine their learning level. So screening test actually helps us identify their learning level against their actual grade level. So going back to the graph again, you can be at grade 8, but you can be at grade 4 in language, maybe grade 2 in maths. Again, just want to highlight that for different subjects, there's a different screening test, and a student can be at different learning levels for different subjects, right? So it's not necessary that if I am lagging behind, I'm lagging behind in both subjects equally. So what it also brings is more personalized approach, and the child can be at a very different level in language, very different level in maths, and from there their learning journey starts. LL is learning level. So on the basis of the screening test, you have learning level allotted. This all happens centrally. We have a support team in the office. So we have this bulk data that comes in on the basis of screening test analysis, and the learning level allotments happen against each child. And the child then starts doing the content. And we will get into the details of the content, but the idea is that depending on the accuracy is their ability to answer questions correctly. For each topic there is a minimum accuracy fixed. So depending on again the complexity of the topic or the fundamental sort of ness of the topic, accuracy can be any number between 70 to 95. Even in some cases like very FLN skills, we've put 100% accuracy. So unless the child has that amount of accuracy, they can't move to the next level. So one, it's at the question level where this adaptivity happens. Second, it is of the overall topic's accuracy level. So by chance, if by fluke some answers are given right, but if the overall topic accuracy is not met, the child is again made to do the same topic or given some remedial measures. Again, for different topics, there are slight variations based on the nature of those topics or skills. But the idea is that unless they attain certain minimum accuracy, they don't move to the next level. And by accuracy they continue to progress and move towards the next level. Now, bringing back that graph once again in our slide, imagine a grade 8 child, and when they start learning, there is a possibility that they, and really say Gayatri grade 8 student is at grade 2 math level, but when I start learning, because of my regularity and regular usage, my ability to learn my grade 2 content can be much faster than the grade 2 child herself. That's a possibility, right? So in that case, is there a way to make it more adaptive or help them jump quicker to their actual closer to the learning level? So to do that, in most of our government programs, we have these quarterly tests. So every quarter there is a 20-25 questions, very small test is designed, which can help us understand where the learning level is. So now this is also third check. I have a question wise adaptivity, then I have a topic wise accuracy check, and then I have a quarterly test, which in a way defines whether the child is at that level progressing or not, is not at that level, maybe for whatever reason they were irregular, or they answered maybe questions randomly but were just lucky. So quarterly test helps us know whether they are at that level, whether they are actually a level behind, or whether they have, despite not completing the whole grade's content, maybe they have already moved to the advanced level. So quarterly test helps us decide and give a learning level jump at that point too. And if the learning level jump happens for some children, then the reallotment of learning level happens, which was done after the screening test. This is done for each language, maths, and we have English as a second language too. All these three subjects. For private school, we also have science, which we are still to develop in Indian languages. Okay, if we talk of the content and content flow, so language content basically focuses on comprehension, which is driven through passages. And there are free questions, and these free questions, which are single independent questions, they help in learning grammatical concepts and vocabulary, letters, whichever relevant topics for that year. But these questions are designed in a way where, again, they are taught, not just the terms. So in grammar, typically, when I learned in my school, the term of that, like visheshan, adjectives, those terms were important for me to recognize an adjective or visheshan. But the way questions are designed here is where the child learns to identify an adjective without even having the word adjective in the question. So there are series of questions to just help them understand what is it that, which word adds value to the object, starts from there, and then slowly introducing the term adjective. And that's how we try to build a more deeper understanding of concepts. So free questions, which mainly focuses on grammar questions and vocabulary questions. And then we have passages or stories. These stories from grades 1 to 6 are mostly all video stories. And again, this feature is mainly developed because, one, heterogeneity of the classrooms. Second, we need to keep in mind, even when I have content in Indian languages, the multilinguality. So while in Rajasthan and Haryana, my medium of instruction is Hindi, I may have children who really speak Marwadi at home or Mewadi at home, which can be closer to Hindi but not pure Hindi. So often these children require visual and audio cues to pick up Hindi as a standard language. So until grade 6, so grade 4 onwards, we also have non-AV passages. But until grade 4, it is full AV, that is audio visually driven passages with subtitles, so that the child can take visual cues. It also provides some engagement. They can also read up, and they can then come to questions that they answer to check for the comprehension. Grade 4 onwards, the number of AV stories go on slightly reducing. The complexity of stories go on building. And for 7, 8, 9, we only have textual stories, where the idea is that by that age, and if Mindspark is really working, then the child should have been able to be an independent reader. So with that, the stories are made. When I say stories or passages, again, a lot of varieties kept in mind. One is the uh, I mean, stories from local context. Second are the stories which are more generic context, which are known across India. There are higher grades. There are certain global stories also brought in and translated. There are also passages, pamphlets, newspaper articles that we put in, because it's important for the child to comprehend not just story, which is high engagement factor, but also to maybe interpret a biscuit wrapper to know the information and answer those questions, or to read up a train ticket and be able to answer those questions, right? So a lot of text passages are, a variety of passages are covered. What we also want to do, which we currently don't have, is include dialogues. So listening comprehension right now is limited in terms of them listening to story, but going forward we also want to build dialogues between the two people and in different contexts, and then the children answering questions. That's something that we are working on. The idea is also to have more SDG aligned content. So because language is one, it has to be diverse and rich in terms of content. We also believe language is a very good way to teach certain important social notions to children. So diversity, equity, inclusion, um, gender biases. I think just being mindful of those things in our passages, including certain passages that can bust those myths or help children understand why they are wrong, is also kept in mind when we create content. For math, it is slightly hierarchical flow because most of the concepts feed into each other. So we have teacher topics identified, which are, say, your addition can be one teacher topic, subtraction can be other teacher topic, and each teacher topic is divided in multiple clusters. So I can, if I say, if I take counting, then my cluster one would be counting from 0 to 10, cluster 2 can be 11 to 20, and stuff like that. So they are sort of segregated into multiple smaller, you can say, sub skill or sub unit, to ensure that they have learned and mastered it. So more granular we go, more confident we are in terms of the child's ability to master the concept and move to the next one. And then each cluster have questions which are targeted to that particular smaller learning unit cluster, and depending on if they answer three questions correctly, they are taken to the next cluster. If they have wrong answers there, they are either taken to a lower grade or lower teacher topic cluster, and they restart from there. So that kind of adaptivity happens for each child in their thing. Both in maths and language, I think roughly for maths we had around 20,000 questions and around 150 games and remedials. For language, 15,000 questions for free questions, and equal 15,000 plus questions for reading comprehension, and 500 plus stories with all the variety that I said. The reason why I'm mentioning this content is also for us to know that in a regular classroom practice, where teacher is teaching, and maybe teachers also as part of revision and practices do question answers, right? Maximum a child can answer is maybe 500 or 700 questions in such way, but Mindspark would allow for 300 to 3000 to 5000 questions a grade. So we are trying to make enough pool for a child to have questions and not to have content getting exhausted before they complete or master the topic.
So there are questions, interesting questions coming up, Dr.
Okay.
Gayatri.
Yeah.
I just was thinking that it's appropriate that we bring in this question by Felix Arogyaraj, who's watching this
Yes.
talk on YouTube, which is how do we measure achievements in learning
Yeah.
outcomes both quantitatively and qualitatively?
Yeah.
That
Uh,
is something that he is bringing up. So I thought, since you're talking about language, and there was earlier a point about learning level as well,
yes.
I thought
Yes.
I would bring in this. Yeah, over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So yes, Mr. Felix, I think important thing, because tracking learning will be crucial. I think two ways. Learning outcomes, we would say, one was, of course, Mindspark based assessments that we have. And we can also, on top of it, the multiple ways of assessing. Informally, it can be just teacher taking a revision session based on the Mindspark score, or there can be planned assessments like even the school unit test and other things. So typically in private schools where there is more homogeneity in terms of learning levels, they try to use some of the Mindspark questions in the regular assessments to interlink and see whether the progress is happening or not. In government school systems, we have quarterly test which is embedded in Mindspark. But in certain cases, if you look at those independent studies, there were separately designed assessments to see whether the learning gains have happened or not. So quantitatively, I think it's by and large set process of assessment that all of us can practice. Qualitatively, because at scale can be a challenge, and I have a couple of videos that I'll show you, but a child profiling, a student profiling is something that we have tried to do. So when we, and this happens, this is coming out more strongly from the government school space, where you, when you do the screening test, if you identify certain children who are really struggling and are way behind their learning grade level, what we can do is we track their learning growth, and we continue to engage with them by going to those schools. So we call it more of student interaction. So some of us go to those schools with the data of children, like we have the data available, we know that these children struggle or are lagging behind in their learning levels. We try and regularly do interactions with them, maybe ask them to read story, ask them to answer questions, there can be math topic too, and we sort of note down those results in our way, and we try and say, okay, at this level the child is not able to maybe answer, not able to read sanyuktakshars, or they read but they are reading in a very fragmented way, they're not reading in a connected way, the whole prosody, which is the interjection and the sentiment of reading is missing. And on the basis of that, it generally corroborates with our reading comprehension. If you track it continuously, say every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever that duration that works out for you, you can qualitatively measure some of those children who are growing. This can be done for any set of children, but because we are more interested in also knowing whether Mindspark is helping out the child who's lagging behind the most, our qualitative studies are generally focused on tracking those children. But again, in a planned way with a specific objective, we can plan it for a larger group in a very specific cohort manner also. Does that answer the question? I hope so. Otherwise, please add your comments and we will come back to that. I'll just quickly move to the next part, which is the language content creation. Again, parts of it I've discussed, but for each language, there is a curriculum mapping that takes place, and we identify grammatical concepts. We try and understand what are the common words, what are the words that are used at high frequency, at lower grades, higher grades, and we try and keep those questions, that word levels, those complexities in mind when we create content. We also try and keep certain content common across languages, especially in the stories part, because that in a way also helps us understand and compare performance across regions, so across languages, right? So that is more from the research perspective, but there is some content which is more anchor content in language. What is important when you design language content is you can't really translate. Each language has its I'll naturally talk a bit more about language because that's my sort of favorite area. But because the languages have so much of nuances in themselves, you can't really translate. So for math and science, we have English content, and we by and large translate it, contextualize it for that language. But when we create language subject content, we create it from the scratch, except for some items that we by choice keep common, like maybe an article on Everest, or maybe a story on some political or some freedom fighter personality, which by and large all students one need to know and maybe are familiar with. So we try to pick some of those common elements, but the other things we by and large customize. Then the whole process of video stories and other things happen. one important feature, and this is again brought in a lot from the multi-grade scenario that exists in the government space. Our each of our questions, again from grade 1 to 6, all the questions, 7th onwards fewer questions, 8th, 9th no questions, carry voiceovers. So each question is read out to the child. So while child has the question on the screen, the question is also read out by the voiceover, so that by chance, if reading is the challenge for that child at that level, also considering their own L1, which is first language, home language, which can be different from their standard school language, they can sort of get supported in identifying the exact question and move forward. So,
Yeah.
beyond question, multiple other things also going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any additional point?
Dr. Gayatri, there's one more interesting question coming up from Madhuri Shinde,
Yes.
who is actually, watching this live on YouTube. Her question is, what are the parameters used for personalized learning apart from the assessment of actual grade of individual child? I think she is talking about the first screening test that
Yes.
you do.
Yes.
I know that you have answered that there is a question level analysis and all that,
Right.
but if you can
Right.
just reiterate that aspect.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I'll just quickly talk about it. So when Mindspark program begins in the very beginning of the year, we do this screening test, and that screening test is a mix of questions from grades 1 to 9, because that's the content we currently offer in the space. And the 4 or 5 questions per grade are picked up in a way, again based on our all assessment research, certain topics which are crucial to master at that grade level are picked up, and those are the questions, and the performance on those questions is tracked. And generally we find a limit, so grade 4 child is given questions until grade 6, and you will see that there are very few students who are also in grade 5 learning level while they're in grade 4. Most of them you will find either at their grade level or at the lower grade level, and that happens. If Madhuri ma'am's question was more about what other than the screening test, I don't think we are doing anything qualitatively to check it. But when we designed the screening test, ma'am, we actually did the test in roughly around 2000, I mean, with roughly around 2000 children. And there we sat and interacted with 25% of those children. So you can say around 500 children, to just ensure that the results we were finding through screening test were matching their actual learning levels. So again, we offered some topics, some questions, some reading material, and observed and scored that qualitatively, just to ensure that our screening test was robust enough. But in the current approach, after the robustness of the test was established, now we only use the test. Yeah. So math, I think I've shared by and large. It is contextual translation in those languages. And when I say contextual translation, we also try to contextualize names. We try and contextualize spaces. We contextualize food items that we use, like in certain fraction questions. If you have pizza, it becomes paratha somewhere else, because those things do support in learning. The more the familiar uh, the context, the child then focuses on the learning aspect. If the context itself becomes unfamiliar, a lot of cognitive energy of the child goes into getting that familiarity first. So a lot of contextualizations, even starting from names to everything, that makes a child sort of more familiar and comfortable in the space is done, and then the content is created. I think I've spoken about it, but broadly, these are the larger topics that we cover. Again, within each topic, maybe for letters and sound, we would have, depending on the language and the extent of sounds and varnas, we might have 7 to 10 sub skills and sub skills. What I want to also quickly spend a couple of minutes on is the what happens post session, right? So when the child completes the session, they at the end of the session get a screen which shows question numbers, the question stems and what was the answer, so the child can exactly know which all answers they gave wrong. Of course it comes while they are doing also, but this is for the child to know that today if I did 30 questions, out of that maybe 5 or 7 were wrong, and depending on the time left the child can still go back and check those 5 or 7 questions. In some cases when teacher is present on that screen with the child, the teacher can take time to see which kind of questions the child has done wrong. So there is a student level accuracy report that comes out. There's also a teacher dashboard which provides for the whole session wise, the whole class's sort of accuracy performance across levels, across topics. It also gives certain specific stronger misconceptions that are coming out. So on that given day, maybe there are few, maybe 2 3 things that comes out, but at a probably at a longer period of time, say weekly or monthly, the teacher can have a more concrete sense of which are the topics or subtopics where there is conceptual gap for these children, and then maybe teacher can take it back and teach it differently, also to ensure that the misconception has got addressed. This also gives teacher a chance to change the way classroom instructions happen. Also keeps teacher sort of in charge, monitoring the child's growth. And if there is a particular child that may need more non-Mindspark support also from learning perspective, the teacher can provide that. From a system perspective, when we work with governments and bigger foundations, I think we also provide school-wise, block-wise, district-wise, state-wise data. Those breakups are made available to relevant stakeholders. Teacher does not necessarily have the access, but the idea is to have different breakups to have more system related information. In certain programs, we have also organized quarterly workshops with teachers and principals on the basis of their school's performances and misconceptions, to also help them develop a better understanding of the classroom practices and how those topics and misconceptions can be taken forward. Um, Quickly, I think it's being used. You can see almost in the whole of India. We are still to venture into Northeast Bihar. We have started this year. And as we move forward, I think we would develop few more languages also. In private schools, it's been used for quite a few years. And there is slight difference in private school and government school model. The screening test is mainly preferred by the government school systems because of the extreme heterogeneity in the classrooms. Private schools generally have more class specific groups, and there the approach is slightly different. But for each board, for each state, the curriculum is mapped, and that content is made available to the students of that. This is the whole team that, I mean, this is the set of people who work on this, but I think all of us have multiple team members who are continuously contributing on making tech, product, field, and content better. So some of us have been associated with it, but the idea is still to continue to relook at our own content, relook at our own data, and make it more relevant for students. And we can't talk about edtech without talking about AI now.
Yeah,
So
so Dr. Gayatri, there's one,
yeah,
before we go to the last part of the talk, and I just want to make sure that some of our viewers who are viewing and they have asked questions, we
yes,
kind of address them. So
yes,
Professor Shunika Kannan, I think, is a language teacher, and she's
okay,
quite curious to know how this process can be adapted for French language. But her question is more, are there plans in the future to make the delivery of content screenless to reduce screen time for children? We keep talking about low tech, ed tech,
yeah,
and you know that considerable investment needs to happen on
right,
infrastructure.
yeah.
So yeah, your take on that.
Yeah. So I think, ma'am, thank you for your set of questions. I think the approach will still be the same for French language too. In fact, we've started working with some South African languages too. Currently, we're working on maths, but we are also researching on how we can create content in those languages. So I think the approach still remains the same. We need certain experts who know the language in and out. With them, we try and identify the language structure. The structure by and large remains the same, right? You have grammar starting from sounds and letter combinations to words, then the basic concepts of grammar, and then more specific nuanced concepts of grammar. But you can really map it out, and then questions are created. Again, the questions, there are certain types of questions, learning questions, or the progression, which over the years now we have identified. So even if there is a very unique grammar topic that exists for a language, we, at least in terms of how to progress that particular topic, that understanding exists in the organization, and with the language experts, if you work, that can be sort of created. So one, that's there. Low tech, yes, I think, and screen time also, right? And it keeps coming up whenever we talk of ed tech, and I also think of it. And I remember when I was in school, TVs had started coming in homes, and we were many parents were worried that if the children would watch TV a lot more, they will have the eyesight will go down, and rightly so. But over the years now, we've realized that televisions have become an integral part of our life. And similarly, I think today, believing that the child will have no screen time is probably a very strong wishful thinking. Children are going to expose to tech. The two things that we want to keep in mind: when they are exposed, or when they are engaged to tech, how are they using the tech to enhance their learning? Which is where I think spending 45 minutes a day on Mindspark, and maybe that way completing around between 20 to 40 hours in a week, putting all three subjects together, is not too much of a screen time, but the amount of learning gains it can bring is a lot more. So that's the justification we've come up with. I think as we advance in technologies, staying away from technology, screen times will be difficult, but then how you leverage that for more of gains than losses is how we wanted to do it. As we say this, I think that if you see our independent studies, right? You see 5x learning gains in one, and somewhere you have 0.232 effect size. We currently keep looking at things where, through maybe lesser number of questions, we can help children learn quickly. And as part of that research, this idea is also to reduce time overall spent, the usage going down, but the learning going up. It's a longer journey, and no
Yeah.
set answers,
No,
but
but I really liked your answer. Okay, that's a valid answer. That if it leads to learning gains, then why not that many
yes,
hours, right?
yes, yes.
Dr. Gayatri, we are coming to the end of the talk. If you can just quickly summarize about AI for a minute, and then we
Yeah,
can,
yeah, yeah,
move
sure.
forward.
Yeah, I just want to feature one slide here, and what we've started doing with AI. Of course, AI is going to bring a lot of analytics, fine tune the teacher dashboards, and give more details. That part is being worked on, but I wanted to highlight some content thing. So we, in our, at least in our English program, we have a story builder now, where the child can create his or her own story. So there are a set of characters given. You can choose the name of the character. You can choose which mood, which strength, which weakness, and on the basis of that, it churns out a story on the go for the child. So rather than me giving 500 stories, there is an incentive for child to think creatively, at least in terms of choosing the criteria. A story comes up, and there are also questions that come up, which are again, it's guardrailed in a such a way that it is typically the way EI designs the explicit and implicit knowledge questions. The AI helps us generate those questions. So the child can actually have unlimited exposure to different types of stories and can answer questions. So while they also get their learning on reading comprehension, they also sort of have a lot of variety options. There is also one part where the child can speak on a particular topic, and the through AI we get a feedback where it highlights what, in speaking, which were the words, what was the grammar that can be corrected. And similarly, there can be a writing thing where the child can actually, of course, creating poetry, but I wanted to put a thing on writing where the child can write, and the AI will again give feedback on the way it was written. So that's how it's being
Yeah, it
created.
is.
Yeah.
Thank you for that last insight because
Yeah.
with AI the
Yeah.
opportunities are endless. Yeah.
Yes.
So before we close the talk, and I want to thank you. I have a question,
Yes.
and question comes from a very personal space that there could be
Yes.
students who are watching who want to start a edtech.
Right.
From your 15 years of experience on field designing, creating, right? What is that one key design consideration
Yeah.
that they need to keep in mind for improving learning?
Right. I think from design's perspective, I would say simplicity of features where the child, of course, decluttered design and simplicity of features. If I had to pick just one thing, I would pick the fonts and the overall simplicity of UI UX as the driving factors, because when we were shifting to tab, we had a lot of design related discussions and we realized that a good edtech or pedagogy driven program, when we were iterating on our tab structure, can really require an oversimplified design principles to drive it. So one is, of course, keeping the user interface extremely simple, having it driven through a lot of visuals, because engagement, when the content is technical, engagement becomes important, and engagement comes more from staying engaged on the screens, or driving it through a lot of visuals, at least for younger ages, and providing voice inputs wherever possible. I think if minimum features, decluttered screen with voice AV inputs, I think is a good way to ensure learning growth.
Yeah, thank you for those key insights.
Yeah.
Those are important things, and usually in creating a design, we kind of get
Yeah.
mesmerized by what opportunities
Yeah.
that are available, and we kind of try to put everything. Dr. Gayatri, it was wonderful having you. I've personally met you, and inspired by your journey of 15 years in the edtech industry. Thank you for the key insights that you gave us, and happy to host you. Thank you so much for your talk.
No, thank you for having me. I think I had a fun time talking about Mindspark and languages. So, if there are questions, anything, I'll be happy to answer through this platform or through LinkedIn or any other platform. Yeah.
Thank you so much for opening
Thank
that
you.
space as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have taken all the questions. Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Bye, all
Bye.
of you. Thank you
Bye.
for joining.